Hello, I'm going to show you how I built this kind of ruined building from a few things that are really inexpensive. So a piece of cardboard, which you probably throw away when you get a delivery from Amazon, and one sheet of foam board, and that's about it really. The only tools I'm going to use are probably a couple of knives, so like a Stanley knife and a craft knife. Some cheap paintbrushes and like a little spatula. I'm going to use some PVA white glue, and I'm also going to use some of this ready mixed filler, and pretty much apart from a little bit of paint, that's everything that we're going to use. To get to this stage, and actually probably a good idea, I'll show you something in between. That's the end result. And here's one that's kind of halfway done, so you can see the structure of the item. We've got the corrugated cardboard as the base, and then the foam board as the walls. And I'm just using some of this ready mixed filler to cover up the cracks, and to also give it a bit more of a debris strewn appearance. So the first stage really is to cut the base to the size you want. Now I've generally been using an 8" by 6" base size, and weirdly when I rip this piece of cardboard off the box, it looks like I've got an exact match on the 8" side. So all I'm really going to do is get a pencil and measure out this side, which I'll cut away. This is by no means a professional build. This is getting some wargames scenery on the table as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible. And I recommend that you have, unlike me, you have a nice sharp blade. Okay, so got our base. What you might want to do is think about the design of the final product. So if we're going to build something like this, think about the sort of footprint of the building. So very roughly, going to look like that. And what I've noticed with a lot of buildings that you can buy commercially, they don't have interiors like this. I think that's quite good for line of sight and movement as well. So let's go like this. So that's roughly where our walls are going to be. We can decide how high the walls are going to be as well later on. So if I get my foam board, again, I'm just going to quickly measure roughly. This is a ruined building, so we don't need to be too judicious about things. That's going to be the short edge. And if I get that other piece, you can see roughly how high it was. So let's keep it about the same sort of height. So we're going to need two of these short edges. So one wall was about 1.5 inches, so we'll say 3 inches. That. We're going to cut these two pieces out. Problem, foam board is fantastic. It's basically, it's a layer of foam with 2 layers of paper sandwich in it, and it's great. It's really good material to work with because it's quite strong, but it's really light. The downside of it is it really dulls your blade. I think it's the foam that does it. Saying that, and then we need our long edges. Let's say about there. And we'll make these the same sort of height. Actually, that's just over 3 inches, so I'm just going to roughly mark the halfway point. If I was doing a building pre-destruction, I'd be a lot more precise with my measurements. I meant to work out how much I paid for a pack of, how many are there? A pack of about 5 or 6 sheets of foam board. I think it was only, it might have been about £1. So all told, this build should cost about 20 pence. So if you get a ruined building for 20 pence, and well, we'll see how long it takes, but it's not very long. That's pretty good. So you could probably do a full 6 by 4 foot table for about £10, I would have thought. Right, so we've got our 4 walls. Yeah, looks fine. We'll do the interior walls in a little bit. What I want to do first is make these look, well, ruined, I suppose. You've got one nice flat edge, which will go on the ground. And this edge, I'll just get a marker pen, and we'll just do a rough idea of where the walls should be. Do that. It helps if the edges marry up a bit, so if you can make them similar heights at the ends, that's good. It's usually a good idea. You might also want a doorway. If you do, just decide where you want it and how wide it is. So we'll look at our last building. I put a doorway here. It's just over 1 inch. So either sort of good gauges if you have a figure of your the scale you like to use. Just make sure it fits. If I change to centimeters for a second, it's 3 centimeters. So we'll use that. So it's 18 centimeters long, so 9 is the middle, 3/4 each side, like that. And then if I find my knife, So this one, I'm just going to take a small piece out. This one I might drop down like that. You can make changes as you go along. This is not an exact science by any means. What I do, using a craft knife, because you don't want a curved, you don't really want curves. This is supposed to be masonry that's been blown away, so I quite like to get choppy edges. So I go in and out like that. This is where your blade really does get dull, but if you keep a few blades for this kind of job, it's like the paintbrushes. If you're going to very carefully paint something, you want a good brush, but if you're doing large areas, you want to keep old brushes for that, and it's the same with blades. I can see I've got a tracery of where the knife's gone through. I can just very carefully go around that, and this should break off, which it does. Okay, there we go. Do the same here. So that's how our wall's roughly cut out. And here's the trick. If we look at the finished one, the walls kind of look a bit more impressive than these. So all I do, I run my knife down both sides of the tops of the wall, probably at a 45-degree angle, away from yourself, usually. And kind of vary the cut so that it becomes quite irregular. The older your blade, the more difficult and the more dangerous this kind of thing is, so watch yourself. This is where the foam board really comes into its own. I don't know of any other material where you can get this sort of effect so quickly. It really behaves like, well, like the real thing. I think a lot of architectural models are made using this. You can see why. And you can just eyeball it, and if something doesn't look right, go back and redo it. You can't really make many mistakes when you're building a ruin. It's a bit pointy. Okay. Right, so we've got our base, and it's pretty much time to glue this down. So there's a short wall. It's a short wall. Decide which one's the front, which one's the back. Put those there. No, we'll do that. Yeah. Now what I'm going to use is very cheap. They're good actually. These paintbrushes, they're just nylon, but they're actually really, really good, and they keep a point better than a lot of the more expensive brushes I've had in the past. This is an old spice jar. Use this and a brush. I would not dip the brush that far in if it was an expensive brush and I was painting a figure, but for the purposes of this, it's ideal. And you just want a good coat. Good. For this section, I'm going to put the glue on the side as well, because that's going to butt up against the one I've just done. And obviously the more wall sections you do at once, the stronger it is as it's drying. Another thing about PVA glue, you've got some drying time. See, if things aren't quite square, you do have some time to sort that out. Whereas I think with the hot glue gun, it dries so quickly, you've got less time to play about with things. Always put your lid on the glue. That will ruin your day if you drop that. Now, this obviously needs to dry. And I've always found that you've got to leave this thing flat when it dries. Otherwise, you will get some warping of the base. This is a little bit warped as it dries, especially when you start putting filler and paint on. But if you can keep it flat at the early stage, just like this, it really does help. I'm going to leave that for a few hours, and then we will start attacking this with the polyfiller. Right, so the next step is to put some texture on here, and to do that I'm going to use this ready mixed filler, which is great stuff really. It dries relatively quickly, and it's really hard when it does dry. I like it a lot. And to put it on initially, I'm just going to use one of these artist's palette knives. And the only other tool I've got is one of these. You probably remember these from school. It's just one of these little spatulas to poke it around. The idea here is to, well, two things really: texture and also stability. So I can use this to cover the ground and make it look a bit more impressive, but I can also use it to fill in some gaps. So the first instance, I'm just going to get some on and smooth it around. I'd probably be very good at decorating cakes, I imagine. You don't want it to be too thick, because then the drying time will be a lot more. I tend to get it up against the corners, and this is where the strength element comes in. You can also use it where there are small gaps. You can just use it to fill those gaps. So it's more aesthetically pleasing, but it also gives it a bit more rigidity. And this is a ruined building, so this is gonna stand in for dust and rubble and what have you. So the first task is to get some on, and then I'll go in and make the texture a bit more impressive. Right, I'm going to swap to the smaller spatula now. Just gives you a bit more control because it's a softer material, the plastic. What I'm aiming to do is get rid of these long smeary marks and make it look a bit more random. where I had a small gap here, I'm going to use the filler to just make a little bridge. Again, it's going to look better, and it's also going to make it a lot more stable. You'll find as well, once this dries up, it adds an awful lot of weight to the whole piece. So it's got a lot of uses, this filler. It's really cheap as well. I think this big tub was £3 or £4. That's about it. I'm going to leave this to dry for, well, I'll probably leave it for a couple of hours because I put quite a lot on there. You can tell I've got a new pot of this because I've been quite liberal with it. But yeah, that's it. Right, the filler has had plenty of time to dry. It's actually been over 24 hours, but I would definitely leave it overnight, probably 12 hours, and it's pretty hard. I don't think there's an awful lot of, there's a little bit of warp in there, but not too bad. But the next job is to get some paint on it, and I'm just going to use these very cheap, this is Reeves paint, but it's like children's paint really. It's water-based paint. And I've just got the blister bit from a blister pack of something, not sure what it was. I'm just going to get some black. I'm going to mix a dark grey to begin with. This first stage is just to get a coat of dark grey on here. So I've just got a bit of black, a bit of white. I'm just going to mix it up. I used to do a coat of black first, almost as an undercoat, but there's really no point. You may as well make your undercoat the first coloured coat really. Just put a bit more white in there. So, that's the colour. And it's just a case of getting the paint on really. Just make sure you get into all the nooks and crannies. The texture that you've put on certainly creates a lot of detail, and there's an awful lot of area to cover. And because the plaster's white, it's really going to show up if you're not careful. And cover it all with this stage. So you'll notice I'm really scrubbing the paint in there. Again, this is a very cheap brush, but they're really good brushes, nylon bristles, but you really got to work it in. Once this is done, I'll leave it overnight again to dry completely, because the next stage is really dependent on this coat being completely dry. What I'm going to do after this is give it it's not really a dry brush, I'm going to paint over this with a layer of light grey, leaving this dark colour in the recesses as much as possible. And then depending on how that looks, we might do a final dry brush of very, very light grey, maybe white, just to bring out any further highlights. So rather than you sit and watch me do this, I'm going to finish it up, and we'll come back when this stage is done. Okay, so for this last part, I've just mixed up a lighter shade of grey, so quite literally just put some more white in the dark grey paint that we had. Get some on the brush, wipe off some of it, and just brush it on. And the trick is to leave some of the darker paint in the recesses, and just get this lighter shade on the higher areas. It just makes it look a bit more three-dimensional. It's like model figures as well, because the scale is so small. You kind of have to make up for the lack of detail from a distance by painting in things like shadows and highlights that on a bigger scale would be more obvious. You know, even if you just painted the thing grey, the natural light and shadow would come through on a bigger scale. On a smaller scale, you have to replicate that with paint. It's part of the process. I really enjoy this. And the final step is just to add some more white to this and do the same thing again, probably a little bit lighter. Okay, the paint is dry again. I've added some more white to make a much lighter grey. I've got some kitchen roll and I'm just going to wipe off some of the paint, not all of it, not all of it. And again, crisscross patterns. Quite fast movements so you don't get any streaks. I don't know if this is shown up on camera, but it really does pick out the details. This is pretty much the final step. You can take it a lot further if you want to. Sometimes if I don't feel like this light grey is enough, I'll do another dry brush with white. But sometimes that can be a little bit harsh. I think really this looks fine. Come to the outer walls because it's quite a flat area. And you should go in one direction and then the other direction, and it should stop any kind of brush marks showing. Okay, this is the final product. It was done for about, I think I worked it out at about 40 pence. So, you know, it's not going to win awards, but it's going to get the job done. If you found this video useful, please do like or subscribe. That would really help. If you've got any questions or if you've got some comments, because this is like my first proper video, so if you've got some suggestions about lighting, camera setup and all that kind of stuff. Or if you've got some things that you'd like us to give a go of, I'm happy to do that. But thank you very much for watching, and I'll hope to see you again soon. Thank you.